I never imagined that the man I loved the most, Albert, could betray me like this, on the night of our anniversary. But the moment I found his second phone, hidden beneath a pile of his old work files, my entire world shattered. What I saw inside changed everything. Albert and I had what seemed like the perfect love story. I met him at a local bookstore on a rainy afternoon, and from the moment he smiled at me, I was hooked. His charm was undeniable, and the way he talked about his dreams and ambitions made me feel like I had found someone extraordinary. Within a year, we were married, building a life together that felt like a dream come true. We lived in a cozy house nestled in a quiet neighborhood. I worked as a graphic designer from home, and Albert ran a small but successful marketing firm. We spent our mornings drinking coffee together, chatting about everything from work to weekend plans. Albert loved to make me laugh, and his little surprises, like a handwritten note in my purse or flowers, just because, made me feel cherished. But life wasn't always perfect. Albert had a tendency to get caught up in his work, sometimes staying late at the office or traveling unexpectedly for meetings. "It's just business," he'd always say, brushing off my concerns. I believed him. After all, he was my husband, my partner. Trust was the foundation of everything we had. Then there was our closest friend, Johan. He had been part of our lives since before we were married, and I adored him like a brother. Johan often visited, bringing warmth and laughter to our home. Watching the two of them bond, I felt lucky to have both of them in my life. Looking back now, those moments of happiness feel like a cruel joke. There were small cracks in our relationship that I ignored. Albert's late-night phone calls, the way he started guarding his messages, and the weekends he claimed were too busy for our plans. I told myself it was all temporary, that things would get back to normal. But I was wrong. The night of our anniversary, everything fell apart. What I discovered shattered not only my trust, but also my belief in the life Albert and I had built together. The first signs of trouble with Albert started months before that devastating anniversary night. He began coming home later than usual, always claiming he had a mountain of work to finish. At first, I believed him without question. He'd always been ambitious, and I admired his dedication to his career. But then the little things started piling up. Albert, who used to leave his phone lying around without a second thought, suddenly became protective of it. He would turn the screen away from me or quickly shove it into his pocket whenever I was nearby. Once, I casually asked to borrow it to look something up, and he gave a nervous laugh, saying, "It's acting up, let me fix it first." His behavior didn't sit right with me, but I tried to brush it off. "You're overthinking things," I told myself. I even confided in Johan one evening, hoping for reassurance. "He's probably just stressed," Johan said with a shrug. "You know how he gets when work piles up." Still, the unease wouldn't go away. Albert began disappearing on weekends, claiming he needed to focus on upcoming projects. At the same time, his affection toward me became inconsistent. One day, he'd bring me flowers and kiss me like we were newlyweds. The next, he'd be cold and distant, too absorbed in his phone to notice I was even in the room. The turning point came when I saw an unfamiliar name flash on his phone screen late one night. "Haley," it read. I froze, feeling my stomach churn. Who was she, and why was she texting Albert so late? He brushed it off with a casual, "just a client," but his evasive tone only fueled my suspicions. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was driving a wedge between us. And as much as I wanted to believe in Albert's innocence, the growing list of red flags was impossible to ignore. The night that everything unraveled started like any other. Albert was unusually quiet during dinner, his eyes glued to his phone as he absent-mindedly picked at his food. I tried to start a conversation, but his responses were short, almost dismissive. "Just tired," he mumbled, but I knew there was more to it. The distance between us had grown so large that it felt like I was sharing a house with a stranger. After dinner, I decided to clean up while Albert went into the living room. As I loaded the dishwasher, I could hear his muffled voice drifting down the hallway. He was on the phone, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite make out. My heart pounded as I edged closer to the door, careful not to make a sound. "Haley, I miss you too," he said softly. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. I stood frozen in place, listening as he spoke to her with a tenderness that used to be reserved for me. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice tinged with longing. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the counter. The man I loved, the man I thought I knew, was sharing his heart with someone else. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to confront him right then, to demand answers, but something held me back. Instead, I grabbed his phone when he wasn't looking. Scrolling through his messages, my worst fears were confirmed. There were texts from Haley, filled with inside jokes, late-night confessions, and plans to meet up. One message read, "Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you." Tears blurred my vision as I read through their conversations, feeling my world crumble around me. When Albert walked into the room and saw me holding his phone, his face went pale. He didn't even try to deny it. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but the evidence was there, undeniable. At that moment, I realized that the love we once shared had been replaced by lies and betrayal. My heart ached, but I knew this was just the beginning of the storm I was about to face. The confrontation happened the very next morning. I couldn't sleep the night before, my mind racing with the texts I'd read and the words I'd overheard. Every glance at Albert now felt like a betrayal. He'd kissed me goodbye on the cheek as if nothing had changed, but to me, everything was different. After he left for work, I reached out to Johan, desperate for someone to talk to. He arrived within the hour, concern etched across his face. "Haley, what's going on?" he asked as I paced the living room. "It's Albert," I began, my voice shaking. "He's been talking to someone. A woman. Her name is Haley." I couldn't bring myself to say more, but Johan's expression darkened, and I could tell he was just as shocked as I was. "Have you confronted him?" Johan asked gently. "Not yet. I need to be sure. I need proof he can't deny," I replied. With Johan's help, I started piecing everything together. Old receipts from unexplained dinners, weekends away where he claimed to be at work, and of course the texts. By the time Albert came home that evening, I had everything I needed. He walked through the door, his face lighting up briefly when he saw Johan. "Hey, what's up, man?" he said casually, but his smile faltered when he noticed me standing there, arms crossed. "Albert, we need to talk," I said firmly. He hesitated, glancing nervously at Johan before nodding. "Okay, what's this about?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. I pulled out my phone, opened the messages, and handed it to him. "Explain this," I said, my voice trembling with anger. Albert's face went pale as he read the texts. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It's not what it looks like," he finally stammered. "Don't lie to me, Albert." I snapped. "I've seen the messages. I heard you on the phone with her. Just tell me the truth." He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he admitted after a long silence. "It started as a friendship, but things got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You call sneaking around behind my back complicated?" Johan stepped forward, his expression filled with disappointment. "Albert, how could you do this to her?" Albert looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, Haley," he said softly. "I made a mistake. I'm so sorry." His words felt hollow, like a bandage on a wound too deep to heal. "A mistake?" I said bitterly. "You destroyed everything we built together for a mistake?" I turned and walked out, slamming the bedroom door behind me. For the first time, I truly understood the depth of his betrayal, and I knew our marriage would never recover. The days following Albert's confession were a blur of heartbreak and disbelief. He moved into the guest room that night, and the silence between us was deafening. Every interaction felt strained and heavy, as though the weight of his betrayal hung in the air, suffocating any chance of reconciliation. I couldn't look at him without seeing the texts, the lies, and the moments he had stolen from us. Johan stayed with me for a few days, offering his support. He tried to get me to eat, to rest, but nothing seemed to help. I felt hollow, like a shell of the person I used to be. My thoughts were consumed with questions that had no answers. Why had Albert done this? Was I not enough for him? Had I missed something along the way? Albert tried to apologize, but his words felt meaningless. He promised it was over with Haley, that he would do whatever it took to fix things, but I couldn't bring myself to believe him. The trust we had built over years of love and partnership was gone, shattered into pieces I couldn't put back together. I threw myself into reclaiming my life, desperate to regain some sense of control. I packed away the photos of us together, redecorated the bedroom, and began focusing on my work. Each small change felt like a step toward healing, even if the pain lingered. One evening, Albert tried to reach out again. "Haley," he said softly, standing in the doorway of my office. "Can we talk?" I looked up from my laptop, my eyes tired and emotionless. "There's nothing left to say, Albert." His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I saw the man I had once loved. "I'll leave," he said quietly. "I don't want to hurt you any more than I already have." The next morning, he packed his bags and walked out of the door, leaving behind the life we had built together. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Losing him hurt, but staying would have hurt even more. In the weeks that followed, I began to rediscover myself. I leaned on friends like Johan, who reminded me that I was stronger than I realized. Albert's betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. Slowly, I started to rebuild, determined to create a life that was mine alone. Months passed, and while the pain of Albert's betrayal hadn't completely faded, I found myself growing stronger with each passing day. The love I thought I could never live without became a distant memory, replaced by a newfound sense of self-worth and independence. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, and the wounds felt fresh all over again. But slowly, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning to live with the scars. Johan became a pillar of support during this time, always there with a kind word or a gentle nudge to keep moving forward. "You deserve so much more than what Albert gave you," he said one evening over coffee. And for the first time, I believed him. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and challenging myself in ways I never had before. Writing became my sanctuary, a way to process the emotions I couldn't put into words any other way. And as I shared my experiences through my work, I found that I wasn't alone. So many others had walked a similar path, and their stories gave me strength. Looking back, I learned one of the most valuable lessons of my life: trust yourself. The signs were always there, but I ignored them because I was too afraid to face the truth. Now, I know that my instincts are worth listening to and that my happiness shouldn't come second to anyone else's. Albert's betrayal could have broken me completely, but it didn't. Instead, it became the catalyst for my transformation. I am stronger, wiser, and more resilient because of what I went through. And while I'll always carry the pain of what happened, I also carry the hope of a brighter future. One that I'll build on my own terms. What would you do if you were in Haley's shoes? Could you forgive Albert, or would you walk away for good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because the next story is even more shocking, and you won't want to miss it.